Uite, a început să fie. Oh, vreau să-mi scot imaginea.
מי זה? זה לא הבן של שי, את רוצה לשבת כאן?
לא, אתה תשב, אני אביא כיסא. כל הניירות האלה, המוסכם על הכיסא. מה זה?
את שמת אותם, שכחתי לעבור עליהם, אני שמתי את זה על השולחן. רגע,
רגע,
הנה אנה.
Tell me, can you hear a noise?
Anna, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Just make with your head. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We will be starting in 2 minutes. We're still waiting for some more people to come.
I-am vorbit acum.
Aude miza.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. We would like to start this event. Thank you all for joining us. We might have some more people joining in the few more minutes. I'll introduce myself. My name is Rotem. I work for the השומר, הצעיר world movement. I'm the coordinator for שנת הכשרה, which is the training program here in Israel. And we thank everyone for joining us today in this collaboration with Moreshet Institution and the World Movement. Tonight, we're honoring this night for the Romanian Holocaust. We will be hearing a lecture by Professor Vago, which is here tonight with us. The lecture is going to be about World War II and the Holocaust of Romania. And right after the lecture, we will have an interview. I will interview Olga Stéphane, the director and creator of the movie Gestures of Resistance, which you all might seen in the past 2 days, which was open for view for everyone here. We will talk about the creative process of the movie, the reasons that led her of the making of this film. So we will be just starting. I'm honored to invite Professor Vago from the History Department of Tel Aviv University and academic advisor of Amir Organization. Amir Organization is the Romanian immigrants in Israel organization. The title of the lecture of Professor Vago will be Romania in World War II and the Holocaust. So I'm very honored to invite Professor Vago.
Thank you very much. I'm very much delighted to participate in this very interesting event, not only because long historical ties that goes on in my biography with the השומר, הצעיר, but also currently with Moreshet. And I would like to thank for this initiative for all the organizers and the participants. Actually, those of you who have seen the film of Olga Stéphane, I may know that the film is also about Slovakia, but I shall concentrate, as Rotem emphasized it, on Romania in World War II and the Holocaust. Although it's another topic, interesting topic, the connection, or rather the functioning of both Slovakia and Romania in the Second World War as allies of Nazi Germany, while Slovakia handed over most of its Jews for extermination to Auschwitz, to the Nazis. Romania did not do it, but it perpetrated its own Holocaust. According to the International Commission of the Holocaust in Romania, the so-called Elie Wiesel Commission that published its findings in 2003, Romania is responsible for the deaths between 280,000 and 380,000 Jews. Now, we do not have enough time, of course, to go deeper into the exact statistics because Romania changed its boundaries and northern Transylvania in 1940 became part of Hungary. So the destruction of the Jews of northern Transylvania was part or is part of the Holocaust of the Jews in Hungary. Although those Jews, 100,000 Jews, were part of Romania between the two world wars. Another very important change was, and we shall see a map shortly, was that Bessarabia and Bukovina were taken by the Soviets, taken by the ultimatum to the Soviet Union in the summer of 1940. And in June 1941, Romania joined Nazi Germany in attacking the Soviet Union and reoccupying, taking back those territories. Furthermore, a territory that was never part of Romania, Transnistria, became the major killing field of the Jews of northern Romania, of Bessarabia and Bukovina. I do not agree with some historians or some people from the public who say that Transnistria is a forgotten land of the Holocaust in Romania. Today, and I mean today in the last generation, the Holocaust in Romania became known. There are many publications. Just last week, I saw 2 new publications published by Yad Vashem on the Holocaust in Romania. We have the Elie Wiesel Commission report. And now we have also the film by Olga Shtefan. Let me just mention another aspect related to our subject, that Olga Shtefan has published a very interesting study in a book that was published recently by CEE All Press, called Memories of Terror, edited by Michaela Gligor, who is among us. I saw her a couple of moments ago. In this book, Olga Shtefan has a very interesting chapter about the Vapniarka camp in Transnistria, a part of the interviews that were also seen in her film. I would like to mention in this context that she interviewed Dr. Veronica Rosenberg, who is also among us, about her father, who was in Vapniarka. In her study about Vapniarka, Olga Shtefan mentioned also Professor Yehiel Benditer and other people who were in that camp, that I shall come to this later. Let me start, or rather go deeper into our subject about the Holocaust in Romania and World War II with several quotations. One of them, or the first one, is from the ruler of Romania, Ion Antonescu, who was speaking before of course, in a secret meeting of the Romanian government, Council of Ministers. Please remember that Romania joined the Second World War by invading the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany in June 1941 with the Barbarossa operation. In December 16, 1941, Antonescu, the fascist ruler of Romania, said among the others, the topic was Odessa, the city of Odessa, which actually was the major former Soviet city that was occupied by the Romanian armies. And among the others, Antonescu says, the Kaiks, the Jews, and he used the Romanian term Zhidani, from Odessa, he told his government, I demand to take them out immediately from the city. And then he says, take them out from the city, put them in caves, place them in the Black Sea, but take them out of Odessa. I do not want to know anything. Maybe 100 will be killed, maybe 1,000, maybe all of them will die. I do not care. This is the fascist ruler of Romania, who was executed rightly as a war criminal after the Second World War. The second quotation is from a survivor from Transnistria, Ruth Glasberg Gold, who in 2009 at the United Nations on the 27th, exactly on the 27th of January, the International Holocaust Memorial Day, she made a very moving speech in the United Nations. And in her testimony about the Holocaust in Romania, she said the following: my Holocaust experience is different from others. I have no tattoo because I'm a survivor of a less organized and methodical plan of annihilation, of extermination. The Romanian methods were primitive and barbaric, but not less deadly than those of Nazi Germany. They did not bother with tattooing, filming, and photographing their inhuman acts. They threw themselves into action without restraint and with such a ferocity that appalled even the Germans. She was an inmate in Transnistria, one of the camps in Transnistria, and you can see from her words a very important aspect of researching Romania's functioning the Second World War along Nazi Germany and the Holocaust in Romania. That Romania devised its own Holocaust. It did not hand over its Jews to Germany. It rather perpetrated the most barbaric things by killing between 280,000 to 380,000 Jews, and Romania is responsible for that. My last quotation to illustrate our point is from a very important study made by the late Jean Anchel, an Israeli historian, who was member of the Elie Wiesel Commission. He published a 2-volume study in Hebrew, which was also published in English. The volume was published by Yad Vashem about the Holocaust in Romania. In more than 1,400 pages, Jean Anchel outlined, or rather described, the magnitude of the Holocaust in Romania. In his introduction, he has a very interesting passage that I would like briefly to read, which again illustrates my point about Romania's role in the Second World War and the Romanian Holocaust, which did not take place in the extermination camps in Poland, but rather on Romanian territory and Romanian occupied territory. Jean Anchel writes the following: Romania's participation in the destruction of the Jewish people took place from its own free choice of the Romanians, based on an anti-Semitic ideology that was prior to the Nazi racism and not because of German pressure or German threats against Romania. But at the same time, when Antonescu's regime reached the conclusion that the extermination of the Jews that remained on its territory does not serve anymore Romanian national interests as he perceived them, he stopped the extermination in spite of German pressures to do so. Another aspect that Jean Anchel and other historians mention, that since the past 20 or 25 years, we know now that Romania planned to hand over all its Jews to the Nazis for extermination in Poland. However, even before the Battle of Stalingrad in October, November 1942, Romania stopped its plans. It plans to hand over because it felt already that Nazi Germany will lose the war. However, as I started and I mentioned it once again, Romania is responsible for the terrible destruction of northern Romanian Jewry, especially on the roads to Transnistria and in Transnistria itself. I mentioned by now at least twice that Romania joined the Second World War by invading the Soviet Union. Romania was a loyal ally of Nazi Germany. Yet, and this is very important also for the younger generation, the Antonescu regime kept a certain magnitude of maneuvering, of independence, of sovereignty, a limited one, vis-a-vis Nazi Germany. In other words, we cannot say that Romania was a puppet of Nazi Germany. There were discussions between the two sides. There were even disagreements and agreements. But Romania participated in with this military participation, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, and taken prisoners by the Soviet Union all the way to Stalingrad. Yet, the Antonescu regime kept to a certain level, which we cannot go into it now, of independence vis-a-vis Nazi Germany. People who are trying to deny the magnitude of the Holocaust in Romania are trying to emphasize from their point of view that Romania could not maneuver and was in fact a puppet of Nazi Germany. This is easier for them to say to cover up for the atrocities that Romania committed against the Jews. Now let us see exactly what, or trying to see briefly in our context, how things have developed in Romania after 1941. First of all, even before 1941, by late 1940, there was a government coalition between the fascist Iron Guard and Antonescu, which lasted several months. And exactly these days, 80 years ago, on the 22nd of January, 1941, a terrible pogrom took place in Bucharest under the situation in which the Iron Guard tried to overthrow the Antonescu's government and take over, and more than 120 Jews were killed in terrible conditions. And there are commemorations both in Romania and Israel and perhaps other places commemorating 80 years since the Bucharest pogrom exactly during those days. The Antonescu regime introduced very severe restrictions on the Jewish population inside the Romanian territory, which later on, or rather at that time, were also implemented on all parts of Romania, of Romanization of the economy, of destitution, persecution against the Jews, taking over Jewish property, and gradually forcing Jews to forced labor. In various Romanian cities, there were ghettos, so-called open ghettos, and I will not go at the moment into definition about the conditions there, but the Jews had to perform, both in Bucharest and other places, forced labor. However, the most terrific actions took place in northern Romania, and by June, late June 1941, and even before that, in June 1940, there was a major pogrom in the city of Dorohoi in northern Romania. And in 1941, with the invasion into the Soviet Union, a terrible pogrom took place in Iași, the city of Iași, and this summer, in the late June this year, it will be 80th anniversary since the pogrom in Iași and around it, in which at least 13,000, if not more, Jews were killed in terrible atrocities committed not by the Germans, as for the years the Romanian communist regime claimed, but rather by Antonescu and his forces.
Professor Vago, we have around 5 more minutes.
Yes, I am very much aware of that. Thank you very much for reminding me. I'm also looking at the watch. And then came the terrible story of Transnistria. The Romanian army, which advanced into the Soviet Union, committed terrible crimes on the way of trying to expel the Jews into the territory of Transnistria, and immediately we shall see a map of the area. Hopefully, technically, it will be solved. And in this area of pushing the Jews into the former territory of the Soviet Union, and the former Romanian territory, rather, and into the area of Transnistria, more than 120,000 Jews were killed, at least on the way perpetrated by the Romanian army, Romanian gendarmes, and local population. Inside Transnistria, which became the killing fields of the Romanian Jewry, we have dozens of camps of ghettos under terrible conditions that lasted until late 1943, early 1944. Only in late 1943, Romania started to allow the Jews to return. I hope now that the map, just a moment, please. I have a map here, which at the moment does not appear. Just a moment, please. Share screen. Look. Okay, unfortunately something wrong with the map. I'm sorry. Perhaps during some of the talk with Olga Stefan, imagining the area could be better, but I want to emphasize that the Jews in that area of Transnistria were kept under terrible conditions. And one of the camps that also figures in the map that I cannot show at the moment, and Olga Stefan features in Olga Stefan's study and film, Vapniarka, was especially directed at those Jews who were assumed to be communists or were really communist and the socialists. It was one of the worst camps, and in the film, those of you who have seen already the film could feel about in the interviews that she conducted about the conditions in Vapniarka. But we're speaking about camps, at least 2 or 3, we can say, death camps in Transnistria, where, as I have mentioned, in total, between 280,000 and 380,000 Jews have perished. My last word is about concluding Romania's recognition since 2004 about its responsibility for the Holocaust. Every year there are commemorations, like it was this year, a couple of days ago in Bucharest, about the pogrom, other events. Every year at Yad Vashem, there are Romanian teachers coming for seminars, learning about the past of Romanian Jewry and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, because the Holocaust, as I started with the words of Jean Anchel, started before the Nazi era with strong anti-Semitism, strong anti-Semitic racist ideology in Romanian society, which led ultimately to those barbaric moments of the Romanian Holocaust. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to Professor Vago. I'm just mentioning that at the end of our session, in the last part, we will have time to ask questions from whoever is interested. So if you have any questions, write them down or wait till the end. We'll have time to ask also Professor Vago and Olga Stefan. And I'm very pleased to invite Olga Stefan. Olga Stefan is an independent researcher, curator, and a documentarian, born in Romania, raised in Chicago, and based in Zurich right now. In 2016, she founded the transnational platform for Holocaust remembrance through art and media, The Future of Memory. So I will hold a talk with Olga about her movie. So good evening, Olga.
Thank you. Hi everybody. One thing I wanted to just ask Dr. Vago if he would like me to share a map that I found now. Maybe that would help just to give us a little bit frame of reference. It's a map of Romania during the war in 1941. Do you guys?
Olga, thank you very much, Olga. I'm sure it will help me in hindsight and for your own talk. Thank you very much, Olga, for sharing the map.
Okay, I'm gonna just quickly do that now before we start, if that's okay with everybody. Is that visible?
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So just to give everybody an idea of Romania during the war, 1941, we see the Dorohoi, the city that Dr. Vago just mentioned. It's the city where there was a pogrom in 1940 and then later on in 1941. We also see the city of Iași that was mentioned by Dr. Vago, the site of a horrifying pogrom at the end of June 1941, where the 13,000 Jews were killed within 3-4 days, and the majority of them were placed on death trains that took them without any water, without any food for a week probably or more, and then dropped them off in a town called Călăraș. And there the survivors were locked up in another camp. We also see Odessa, another town that Dr. Vago mentioned, which of course is currently in Ukraine. And then we see Vapniarka. These towns were, these towns, Vapniarka was just a little village. Odessa was a big city, of course. Both of them were in Transnistria, the region that was awarded by the Nazis to Romania as a compensation for giving the Hungarians northern Transylvania, that we also see in orange or cream, something like that. Okay, so I think that's it. Okay, so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to just mention very quickly that Therese Moses is with us. And Therese is one of the protagonists in the film. She's 100 years old, and I am so grateful that she's here.
Thanks a lot, Olga. So we'll start with really the basics. If you would like to tell us just a bit of where you're from and what brought you to actually making this film?
So the film was conceived in 2018, and the platform, The Future of Memory that you mentioned earlier, is the frame within which I conduct these types of activities, remembrance activities. And before, the different activities that I had conducted included exhibitions, art exhibitions in different parts of Romania, featuring forgotten Jewish artists that had been killed during the Holocaust, or that had made artworks that had either been forgotten in the historical canon of art history, or whose works just didn't, were not known in Romania, those particular works. So it was a combination of forgotten artists or forgotten artworks. And that was the main mission of this platform, The Future of Memory. And in 2018, I began researching anti-fascist resistance. And anti-fascist resistance at that time, even of course in 2018, was of course a topic that was very important to reconsider and to revisit and to reclaim, actually. What was anti-fascist resistance? Who were all the different types of people who were involved in anti-fascist resistance? And how was this activity performed during the war? And what can we today learn from these heroes, basically, from these heroes? So for me, that was the beginning, this need to reclaim this history and to remind ourselves today of the heroes that actually existed, that Jews were not necessarily only sheep that went to the slaughter, as the term was called, but also fought back and tried to resist, along, of course, alongside many, many different other parties, social democrats, communists, Democrats, and so on. So there were moments and there were gestures, as the title of the movie, of resistance that we need to learn from. And the documentary is the result of that need of mine to demonstrate in today's society that there are ways for us to counter the rising nationalism that has taken hold in so many European and democratic societies. So the film actually came together from this need, and then I tried to find funding, and there was, of course, this grant that was offered by the European Union. And in order to apply for this, I had to, of course, create the whole concept of the film and to show how the actual event of the film affected multiple countries. And we know, I mean, it's a no-brainer that the Holocaust was a transnational disaster and crime. So it wasn't hard to find partners in different countries. But what really struck me and why I chose Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, was because of a shared story. And that, of course, begins the documentary with Erika Bezdíková. And we see how these personal stories cover entire nations, you know, and span entire continents. And her story, of course, begins the whole epic, let's say. She's the sister of a former partisan, and she tells us about the heroic acts of her sister as a partisan during the Slovak national uprising. And this sister ended up in Cluj, Romania, after the war. She survived, of course, Terezin. She met her partner in Terezin, and together they settled in Cluj. And then, of course, we find out that Erica went back to Prague, and Yolana, her sister, followed soon after.
Okay, thank you. We can see in the movie really a number of interviews that you found talking to some very interesting people, some of whom are very old. It might be, I don't know, maybe the last interviews they gave sometimes. And I would like you to choose a certain interview or person that really touched you or was meaning something special for you, and to elaborate a bit about this encounter.
Well, I was attached to all of the Romanian interviewees, I have to say. Of course, that's an emotional and sentimental connection. And of course, I also related to all of their stories from a personal perspective, because in my own family, I have family members who went through those horrors and experienced those horrors. But I do have to say that I was very moved by Alexandru Elias because he passed away during the film, and also because he spoke about this Hashomer Hatayir trial that took place in 1942, and he helped us understand the climate in Romania at the time, and reminded us of these fallen heroes, you know, the two young activists within Hashomer Hatayir who actually were condemned to death and were killed for the mere act of trying to speak against the war and to encourage people to rise up against the war. So what they did was just to distribute some pamphlets and to put little posters up saying "Down with the war." And for this gesture, in fact, nobody, you know, none of them planted bombs. That was a different story. There were those types of incidents as well, where communist cells did plant bombs on railroad tracks, and they were also executed. But these young people within the Hashomer Hatayir movement, the only thing that they did was just distribute some pamphlets with "Down with the war." And they were executed. These two were executed, and the rest of the Hashomer Hatayir cell was sentenced to 10, 15, 20 years of hard labor. Luckily, in 1944, Romania was liberated, so they only served 2 years of that sentence. And this is a case that's not very well known in Romania, and it's definitely not covered very much in Romanian historiography. But these people definitely need to be remembered, and I'm really glad that I had the chance to speak to Alexandru Elias and to get this story directly from him.
Thanks, Olga. My next question is about the general idea and feeling that you wanted to pass through this movie. And I'd be happy if you could say also, where do you think in that movie a specific moment where you felt that this idea could be passed through? You've mentioned the idea of resistance and how it perceived today in our consciousness, but maybe you could tell a bit more about this, about maybe the educational or the methodical idea that you wanted to pass through this movie.
Well, you know, I think that for our viewers, the conclusion of the film, the last few minutes of the movie, are kind of a clear indication as to what my mission with the movie really is, and what I'm trying to communicate to our generation and the generation of our children. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, with the mission that I had, you know, initially in actually conceiving the movie, I kind of pushed it forth, you know, all the way till the end, through that juxtaposition of images of before and now. The message is for me very clear. I think that the fact that Teresa is with us and she's the voice that concludes the film with her call for solidarity, this is indeed the message that I want everybody to come away with. That solidarity, as Teresa told us, is an absolutely a huge necessity in our world today. And what are those gestures of solidarity? We must ask ourselves, how can we perform solidarity in our lives, in our political activity? Indeed, that is the entire message of the film, that solidarity is mandatory.
Thanks a lot. My last question is about the movie, about the music of the film. I wanted to ask, it is a special creation, especially the soundtrack. And I want to ask about how did it came to be? How was it created? And what brought you to choose these specifics in creating the soundtrack?
Well, I did a lot of research about the music of the Holocaust and the poetry written during the Holocaust. And I combined, I was very careful in combining each song with each individual that is interviewed. And there are a couple of songs that are absolutely beautiful and essential to the atmosphere of the movie that are not very well known either. And the stories behind them are also really important because they add layer upon layer of history and how shall I say, they also reveal the actual performances, reveal the turns of history, the really tragic turns of history. So, for example, you know, one of the first pieces of music that we have in the movie that is accompanying the testimony of Erika Bezdikova is the Terezin March. It's called the Terezin March, and it is a composition that is kind of like the background of the discussion of the partisan work, Jolana's partisan work. And that piece, the Terezin March, was composed in Terezin by a Romanian composer named Rafael Schechter. Rafael Schechter was born in 1905 in Brăila, Romania, and he emigrated to Prague as a child, and he did conservatory in Prague. He became a very well-known musician, and then he, of course, as a Jew, was deported to Terezin in 1941, and there in Terezin, he was in charge with the musical activity of the camp. And it is there that he got the inmates to participate in the Verdi Requiem, which was a musical performance that was done in as a symbol of resistance to the Nazis. And let's remember that the Terezin camp was a camp that was used by the Nazis as a show camp for the International Red Cross. The International Red Cross asked to go inside the camp at the request of the Danish king. So the Danish king submitted complaints about the deportation of Danish Jews to the Terezin camp, and through his pressure, the International Red Cross entered the camp. And of course, the Nazis put on quite a show. They forced the inmates to make the camp look good, to show all the cultural activity of the camp, and to pretend as if everything was fine. And the Verdi Requiem functioned as a resistance to the oppression of the Nazis in the camp. Raphael was deported from Terezin to Auschwitz at the end of the war in 1944. And he died literally 1 month before Czechoslovakia was liberated in 1945. He died on a death march. He almost survived everything. And on that death march, after years of captivity and horror, he died on that last death march right before liberation. So Terezin March is, of course, a very important piece that I included. And then what I do want to mention is the really important partisan song, Zot niet keinmal, by Hirschglick. And maybe some people know who Hirschglick was. He was a poet that was a prisoner in the Vilna ghetto. And he wrote this piece and it became, let's say, the symbol of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And from there, it became, let's say, the symbol of every Jewish partisan in Eastern Europe. And it's the partisan song that kind of represents the will to live and to fight back to survive. And the reason that this, I mean, poor Hirschglick, he actually was killed. Yeah, like the majority of these poets, he also perished during the Holocaust. But I do want to mention that the version that is sung at the end of the movie is by Paul Robeson. And Paul Robeson is kind of a forgotten civil rights activist from the States. He's an African-American communist and civil rights activist before the civil rights movement actually gained ground in the 60s. So he was involved in the workers' movement. He was involved in civil rights activism from a very, very early point in the American 20th century. And he was an opera singer and a sportsman. He was an incredibly accomplished individual. And he went around all of Europe singing. He actually played Othello, for example, on the London stage. He was the first Black man to be on a London stage and played Othello. And he was blacklisted in America, of course, because of his political affiliation. So he went to England and performed there and had to be in exile in England. And because, of course, he was a communist, he went to the Soviet Union In 1949, he was invited to perform in the Soviet Union in 1949, which was the peak of the anti-Semitic purges by Stalin's anti-Semitic purges. And he found out while he was in the Soviet Union in Moscow, he found out that his friends, Jewish friends, were tried at that time, and that there was something happening. Of course, it was very secretive. The whole situation was very secretive, and nobody knew exactly what was happening. But behind the scenes, the purges were in full swing, and already Jewish anti-fascists who were living in the Soviet Union were being persecuted and killed by Stalin. And so on the day of his performance, he got up on stage and he, of course, played his repertoire. He sang his repertoire. And out of a symbol of extraordinary solidarity, he sang the partisan song. He sang it in Yiddish and he sang it in English. And that is the recording that I included at the end of the movie. The recording from 1941, when Paul Robeson, a Black civil rights leader who was being persecuted in America, sang the partisan song on the Soviet stage in solidarity with the Jews who were being persecuted in the Soviet Union.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Olga. It just really explains many complexities and connections that you intertwine in the movie. I think it's amazing. So now we have some time for questions. So we're going to do it this way. You can either, yes, Professor Vago.
Yes, I would just like to add to Olga Stefan's words, very interesting words, that she's working now on the less known trial of the השומר, הצעיר in Romania, 1942. I would like to mention to our audience that 2 out of the top 3 leaders of the השומר, הצעיר who were jailed, and they said they were for only 2 years until the liberation of Romania, became very well-known professors at Tel Aviv University. One of them, Michael Harsegor, who is very well-known to the Israeli public, and Professor Moshe Gil, who was also my dean at the Faculty of Humanities. Both of them passed away already, and they were on the top echelon, unfortunately not the executed part, of the השומר, הצעיר. And I think that you are doing a wonderful job in trying to reconstruct the less known in historiography of the השומר, הצעיר trial in 1942. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to open up for questions. So you can either open your mic and ask a question, either Olga or Professor Vago, or you can type it in the chat of the Zoom. So which way would you like? We're going to have a few minutes. So.
Hi.
Yeah.
It's a question. I'm not sure whether it's for Professor Vago or for maybe Olga, both of you. Growing up in Israel, being from Romanian background myself, my family came from Bucharest, and they always said that the Shoah did not come to Bucharest, and their family, like the Regat Jews were saved or spared by the Romanians. So if you could elaborate how come, what happened to the Jews living in Bucharest itself, or the Regat Jews, how they call it? Thank you.
Olga, you want to answer first, or me? How would you like?
No, please, Dr. Vago, I would really appreciate your answer.
Very briefly to the question. In historiography and in the memories of the Holocaust in Romania, there is always the saying that half of Romanian Jewry survived the war, the Holocaust, and this is correct, while the other half, unfortunately, were killed, destroyed by the Antonescu regime. Bucharest was the largest Jewish community in Romania, numbering about 100,000 people. They survived the war in Antonescu's regime, under very bad conditions of expropriating their properties. They had to sell or give away immediately their property, their jobs, had to give up their jobs. However, what is very interesting, that the Jews of Bucharest, and not only Bucharest, also the other smaller towns and cities in the Regat in Romania, but especially in Bucharest, developed what we can call today a very strong civil society of mutual aid, helping each other in education, theater, philharmonic, medical assistance to each other, and other activities which helped them survive. Now, as I mentioned in my words, we know today, but the Jews of Bucharest did not know, of course, at that time, and nobody knew, that Antonescu had plans until late summer, autumn of 1942, to hand over all the Jews of Romania, including the Regat, for destruction. So those family stories who came from Bucharest, and they survived the war under grave conditions, difficult conditions, but not mass killings, not physically so much hurt, except the Bucharest pogrom that I have mentioned. It is true. I wouldn't call it a miracle, because Antonescu decided not to destroy them as he destroyed the Jews of northern Romania. You may be interested in reading, again, in Anchel's book, the 2 volumes published by Yad Vashem in Hebrew about the Holocaust in Romania, where he concentrated, as we say in Hebrew, dafka, less on Bucharest, and he concentrated more on the difficult areas. Thank you.
Hello, I'd also like to say something.
Who is speaking?
Veronica Rosenberg. The
yes.
Chat is disabled, so I just found myself talking. So first I would like to greet Mrs. Teresa Moses, whom I visited a short time after my interview took place, I think at the beginning of 2018. And also my supervisor, Professor Rafi Vago, and I wish all of the participants strong and safe health. I'd also like to say that when I saw the film for the first time at its being launched in Bratislava on May 24, 2019 or 18, I already forgot, I did not notice that the transport of Jews from Hungary and Transylvania maybe could have been avoided if the countries of the world, of Europe, had accepted and acted when it was already known what they were doing, the Germans at Auschwitz. It was a report talked about by Erika at the beginning of the film. The Erika, who is no longer with us, she also passed away as part of the participants in this movie, in this impressive movie. And she talks about 2 people, 2 Slovak people, Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler, who provided a kind of report about the situation taking place in Auschwitz. I'd like to ask either Professor Vago or Olga, if you know a little bit more about these things, and eventually say a few words. Thank you.
Olga, please.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. I'm really glad to see you, although I don't see you. I don't know where you are. You're somewhere.
At the beginning of
the I also want to actually mention about the 3 people that passed away. Of course, Erika Bezdikova, I mentioned Alexandru Elias, who we know passed away during the filming, but also Teodora Iancu.
Teodora Iancu.
Yeah, Teodora Iancu passed away at the beginning of this year. And this testimony that she gave in this film is the only one that she gave about her father, Marcel Iancu, and about his family. So it kind of underlines, of course, the importance of making sure that we record as many testimonies as possible, because things are ending for a certain generation. So I'd like to address now the topic that you brought up. The report that was written by Verba was actually distributed, and it says also in the film, it was distributed widely in underground circles. And it made its way very quickly to Cluj as well. It's mentioned again in the documentary that it got into the hands of Kastner. Kastner is a topic that I presented in as much detail as I could in an exhibition that I organized in Cluj in 2017. And the train that Kastner organized is, of course, at the center of that exhibition. We had some screenings with documentaries about that particular chapter in history about Kastner's organizing a train and all of his negotiation with Eichmann. So that report got into the hands of Kastner. Kastner chose, for a variety of different reasons, not to make that known to the Jewish community of Northern Transylvania, including Cluj. And the Jewish community members and administration and leadership of the Jewish community in Northern Transylvania decided that it would be beneficial to just listen to the local Hungarian authorities and do as they say. Pack up the bags, go on the trains, and be orderly and calm, and conduct all of these activities in an orderly and calm way, despite the report that advised that Auschwitz was a killing camp, extermination camp. So that has made the whole Kastner situation a very, very problematic one, and history is still battling out how to judge Kastner for the long term. Now that report also made its way to Switzerland. So that report made its way to Switzerland, and a very interesting side note that I've read is about the Ecuadorian embassy in Switzerland. In the Ecuadorian embassy in Switzerland, there was a Transylvanian Jewish administrator who had made his way to Ecuador and then back to the embassy. So before the war, he had established himself in Ecuador, and then he was assigned a post at the Ecuadorian embassy during the war. And he convinced the ambassador of Ecuador in a miraculous way to, after reading that report, to start issuing passports to Hungarian Jews. And many Hungarian Jews in Northern Transylvania as well were saved through the acts of this particular functionary at the Ecuadorian embassy, who was who was born in Northern Transylvania and was a Northern Transylvanian Jew, Hungarian. So there are many different stories like this, but what we do also need to remember is that the Allies, that's the conclusion, the Allies did not do anything. So that's ultimately, despite all of these stories, the stories of individuals helping Jews, individuals in a position of help, of able to help Jews, ultimately the states in the West, the main states in the West, when they were confronted with the possibility of intervening and doing something, didn't.
Well, that's
very briefly, if I may add, Dr. Rosenberg, Veronica Rosenberg, made here an excellent provocation that we cannot solve at the moment here, but very briefly, the Auschwitz report of Verba, and in parentheses, at a major conference about the Holocaust in 1994 in Budapest, I had the honor of meeting Verba and hearing a lecture about his escape and the protocol. The Auschwitz protocol reached not only Kastner, as Olga now in detail gave us some aspects, but the leader of Hungary, Horthy himself and other people, in the very well-known book by late Professor Randolph Braham, The Politics of Genocide. You can find much details. And lately, Moreshet, and we are hosted here by Moreshet, Yalkut Moreshet, the excellent yearbook, excellent journal on Holocaust and anti-Semitism, published both in English and Hebrew, had or has an article, I forgot now the exact details, by a young PhD candidate about the fate of the Auschwitz report. So those of you are interested in this aspect that Veronica raised may go and see there what was the fate of the Auschwitz report in Yalkut Moreshet. Either it was published already or will be published shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have some other things to say, but I'll be waiting for other people to have the word.
So just not to push through our time limit, I would like to have one last question.
I can speak, please. My name is Michael Bar-El from Israel. And it's a question to Olga. What I miss in this movie is, especially this evening, this is organized by השומר הצעיר. I know there was a cooperation of השומר הצעיר in Romania with השומר הצעיר in Hungary. And it was an operation called Tiul, because they tried to save Jews, young Jews, from Hungary and pass them through Romania to Constanza and the ship to Israel. So I think it should be noted somewhere in this film.
Yeah, I do have to say that there was a huge operation that I'm aware of, yeah, there's so many different cases that I even mentioned now, for example, side notes to history and so on, that I didn't have any survivors to be able to speak to that. So in this film, I chose to focus on the actual survivors' stories and the children of the survivors, to tell the stories of the people that went through those particular events. And although I knew about this operation, I didn't have any survivors that were able to speak about it.
I think that they are living in some kibbutzim here in Israel. I hope they are living. I don't know.
Okay. I'd be delighted if you would be able to put me in touch, because indeed it's something that is absolutely necessary.
I don't know if they are alive. I have a book with summarizing their comments, their stories, but it's in Hebrew.
Okay. Well, if we can be in touch, I'd appreciate any follow-up that you can offer.
Okay, so I'll try through the השומר הצעיר how to be in touch with you.
What's your name?
Michael Bar-El.
Okay, I'll just send you a message right now.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so I want to conclude and say some thanks. So of course, first of all, I want to thank Olga Stefan for our interview and her amazing, evoking creation. And of course, if you haven't seen yet the movie, make sure you see Gestures of Resistance. And I want to thank, of course, Professor Wago for his insights, for enriching us with his great knowledge. I want to thank Amir Organization for helping distributing this event. And I want to thank השומר הצעיר, World Movement, for leading this event. And of course, Moreshet Institute in Givat Chaviva for creating this event and leading it. And last, I want to thank everyone here who participated. Thank you all. I wish you a pleasant evening and good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Rafael Vago, thank you for joining.
Olga.
Thank you.
And all of you, thank you very much.
Yeah. We're speaking on top of each other, sorry. Yeah, I'm really grateful that everybody joined. I'm really grateful to Hashomer. I'm really grateful to Anya Levich for putting this together, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.